Stress is a really interesting topic because even though we all deal with it on a pretty constant basis, it can be pretty difficult for us to define. After all, what is stressful to one person may not be to somebody else. Even if it is still stressful, it may not be experienced in the same way. Understanding what stress is and the role it plays in our health is the topic of today's video. Keep in mind that this is a general overview video. That means that I will talk about several general aspects of the topic today, and that this video will be generally a little bit longer and a little less detailed. If you would like to know more about topics like stress management and physiological components of stress, you can check out the other shorter videos I did on those subjects. The links for those videos can be found below. Stress can be defined as the process whereby an individual perceives and responds to events that they judge as being overwhelming or threatening. These events, known as stressors, can be perceived differently from one moment to the next and from one person to the next. This is why it's important to stress how the judgment part of the definition influences our perspectives about the event and how that's critical to how stressful you consider something to be. The way in which we judge, or also known as appraise, the amount of threat we are facing happens in two stages: the primary appraisal and the secondary appraisal. During the primary appraisal, we are determining whether or not an event we are facing is a threat or a challenge. If it's a challenge, the event could still be stressful, but it has the potential for leading to personal growth. This typically means that there is no direct threat to your mental or physical well-being, or that those risks are very small. If we appraise the event to be a threat, we are perceiving it as potentially dangerous to our mental or physical well-being. We only go on to the secondary appraisal if we determine in the primary appraisal that we are facing a threat. In the secondary appraisal, we determine what options we have available to deal with the threat. If we have good and effective options, the event is less stressful. If we have no options or really ineffective ones, the events are usually experienced as being a greater threat and thus are more stressful. So, for example, imagine you were told that you have a disease that could potentially kill you. Obviously, in the primary appraisal, this is something that you are going to determine to be a threat, since it directly involves your well-being. However, if the doctor tells you that there are really good options available to treat the disease and save your life, it will likely be less stressful than if the doctor tells you there are no treatments available and there's no cure for the disease. Keep in mind that this process of appraisal is a great example of a psychological process that is largely done automatically and doesn't have to involve a tremendous amount of logic. After all, sometimes we have to be able to make these appraisals of stressors in a split second. Another component of how we define stress is viewing it as either being a stimulus-based definition or a response-based definition. A stimulus-based definition is more focused on the stressful event itself. It works well when we're talking about events that clearly fall into the category of being a threat. A response-based definition is more focused on how a person appraises the situation and may find an event to be stressful. For example, you being the victim of a violent crime would definitely fit more neatly into the category of a stimulus-based definition because no matter who you are, that type of an event will just inherently be stressful and threatening to you. An example of an event that may fit neatly into a response-based definition would be something like a fear of public speaking. I remember when I was a kid, I was terrified to speak in public. It would always piss me off though because I would see other people that seemed to have no problem with it at all. Other people didn't seem nervous, and speaking in front of people just seemed to come natural to them, while I would be drenched in sweat and stuttering. This is response-based because it wasn't the event necessarily itself that was threatening or stressful. It was how I was perceiving it. Likely, the people that didn't have a problem with it perceived the situation differently than I did. I viewed it as more of a threat, and they viewed it as more of a challenge. There is yet another aspect of how we define stress that is important for you to know, and that is the difference between good stress, or what we call eustress, and bad stress, which we call distress. This goes back a little bit to the terms we used when describing what happens in the primary appraisal. Not every event that we face that can be stressful is necessarily dangerous or threatening. Sometimes they can be an opportunity for personal growth. In psychology, we can see a pretty significant difference between the health consequences of these two types of stress. Eustress doesn't seem to have much of a negative impact on our health, whereas distress can be hugely impacting. To explain the difference between these two, I like to use the example of something like a college student. Going to college and learning in general is hugely beneficial to your personal growth. However, now imagine that this college student has to do midterms for all of their classes, plus papers, and all of this on top of a whole host of personal issues that, of course, are going to pop up right at the wrong time. Now, instead of feeling like learning is a challenge that leads to personal growth, this college student is beginning to feel like they're drowning. You just went from eustress into distress. The difference between the two is typically determined based upon your performance level. We are generally able to rise to the occasion to meet the demands brought about with eustress, but tend to have a diminishment in performance with distress. This is that feeling like you're drowning, or that feeling of being overwhelmed. It's important to recognize when this happens because it is key to how to properly manage stress so that it doesn't have a negative influence on your health. The way in which our bodies respond to stress helps us better understand the connection between stress and our health. When we experience stress, our bodies go through a process that is called the General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS for short. Yeah, by the way, we all have gas, haha. Some people are a little bit confused also by the term syndrome because we tend to think of that word as referring to illnesses or disease. However, the way it is used in this sense is more of a change in the way your body functions rather than referring to an illness or a disease. When we experience a stressful event, our brain sends signals to our bodies that ultimately cause a whole series of chemicals to be released in our nervous system and also throughout our bloodstream. The two most important of these chemicals are the hormones epinephrine and cortisol. Epinephrine you can think of being the immediate fuel for the fire that causes that fight or flight response that is also called our sympathetic nervous system. Cortisol, which is usually referred to as being the stress hormone, plays more of a supporting role. It triggers other parts of your body to start regulating how they use glucose so that additional energy can be directed to help support this fight or flight response. The way in which your body responds to this process is what the General Adaptation Syndrome specifically refers to, and it can be broken down into 3 stages. Those stages are alarm reaction, the stage of resistance, and the stage of exhaustion. You can remember them with the mnemonic, the 3 stages of the General Adaptation Syndrome are, where the A stands for alarm, the R stands for response, and the E stands for exhaustion. During alarm reaction, your body is immediately rising to the occasion. This is the initial triggering of that fight or flight response that leads to all those physiological changes that we think of when we feel threatened or scared. As that begins to fade, your body goes into the stage of resistance, where it's remaining on guard and is prepared to respond, but isn't experiencing the same reaction when a threat is imminent. One way or another, the stage of resistance eventually stops. Either this is through the threat or the potential for the threat subsiding, or simply through exhaustion. It's important to remember that although the sympathetic nervous system's fight or flight response is critically important to our immediate survival during threatening situations, it's actually damaging to our long-term health. The effects epinephrine and cortisol have throughout our bodies place an extra burden on our hearts, our lungs, muscles, and even our blood vessels. At the same time, it also takes resources from our digestive system, immune system, and overall prevents our bodies from going into the parasympathetic nervous system state that is critical to our long-term survival. This is the reason why long-term stress can lead to all sorts of medical issues like an increased risk of diabetes, heart attacks, stroke, digestive disorders, and even an increased risk of infections. This is one of the reasons why psychology has focused so much effort in helping people better manage stress. Health psychology in particular, which helps integrate psychology and medicine, has been focused on the topic of stress for quite a long time. There are many factors that have been uncovered by health psychologists that can contribute to our perceptions of stress and how well we're able to deal with the stress that we do have in our lives. One is overall personality traits. Health psychologists have discovered that people with personality traits that include being intensively driven, preoccupied with work, overly structured and inflexible, and impatient are almost 7 times more likely to have heart disease than people who are not. They term this group of personality traits a type A personality. People that do not have these types of traits are referred to as type B. These are terms that I'm sure all of you have heard before, but oftentimes they tend to be used incorrectly. Often we think of a type A person as just being somebody who's assertive or overly confident, when in fact that isn't necessarily the case. So next time you hear someone bragging about being a type A personality, ask yourself why somebody would brag about something that makes it far more likely that they'll die of a heart attack. Another key aspect to how we manage stress deals with our perception of control. This ties into a concept known as locus of control that will be discussed in my video on personality. Essentially, it has to do with how much control a person thinks they have over the events in their life. If a person believes that they do, then they are usually better able to handle stress. It should be noted that this doesn't mean the person is necessarily controlling. In the end, we have very little control of many events in our life. This refers more to how a person can have a sense of control over how they deal with the stressful events that they're presented with. People who have little sense of control often have what is known as learned helplessness. Learned helplessness refers to the acquired belief that you are powerless to do anything about stopping stressful, threatening, or otherwise negative experiences from happening in your life. As I mentioned, this is an acquired belief, which means that it is a personality trait that is fostered and begins usually in childhood. Often, it can be the result of children that have experienced abuse or neglect and have had to rectify those experiences by essentially accepting it as their fate. Obviously, you can see where someone that has this type of mentality is less likely to either try to change a bad situation or to try to find better ways of coping overall with stress. This is really unfortunate because there are multiple ways that we can help people better deal with the stress that they have in their lives and limit the impact stress has on their life. If you'd like to know more about this, please check out my video on managing stress. You can find the link for that video below. Also, if you're enjoying these videos, please take a minute to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to like the individual videos. A video of just 10 minutes in length may take several hours to write, record, edit, and publish. Subscribing to my channel helps show support, which allows me to continue to grow this video library and help all of you better understand psychology, as well as to grow my channel into other topics like anatomy and physiology, growth and development, and others. Thanks for watching, everybody, and have a great day.